They didn't save me a seat. I stood at the back of the auditorium, watching my sister's college graduation from behind a crowd of strangers. The ceremony was perfect: polished speakers, proud families, cameras flash, but when they called her name, Rebecca Thompson, summa cum laude, my parents jumped to their feet, tears streaming down their faces. My mother clutched my father's arm as my sister crossed the stage in her cap and gown. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. I clapped quietly from the shadows. Invisible to my own family, they had no idea that in exactly 48 hours the Air Force Band would play Hail to the Chief because of me. Growing up in the Thompson household meant understanding your place in the hierarchy. My father, Robert Thompson, was a successful corporate lawyer who'd built his reputation on winning impossible cases. My mother, Patricia, had been a federal judge before retiring early to focus on supporting the family's success. Rebecca was their golden child, valedictorian, debate team captain, early admission to Harvard Law. She was everything they'd dreamed of: articulate, ambitious, and absolutely certain of her path. Then there was me, Charlotte Thompson, the quiet one, the one who asked too many questions about why things worked the way they did, instead of just accepting them. Where Rebecca excelled at memorizing case law, I was fascinated by how governments actually functioned behind closed doors. While she won mock trials, I spent hours reading declassified documents and policy papers that most people found impossibly boring. My parents saw this as a phase. "Charlotte's going through her conspiracy theory period," my mother would say with a practiced smile when neighbors asked about my interests. My father was more direct: "She needs to focus on practical skills. Political science won't pay the bill." The differences became more pronounced as we got older. Rebecca's bedroom wall was covered with certificates, medals, and photos from academic competitions. Mine had maps, not decorative ones, but detailed topographical charts of regions most Americans couldn't locate on a standard world map. I'd study supply routes, population centers, and geopolitical tensions. My parents assumed I was planning backpacking trips. I never corrected them. During family dinners, the conversation always centered around Rebecca's latest achievement: her internship at a prestigious law firm, her score on the LSAT practice tests, the scholarship offers rolling in from top universities. When anyone asked what I was doing, the answers were always vague. "Charlotte's still figuring things out," became my mother's standard response. The truth was more complicated. I'd been figuring things out since I was 16, when a seemingly routine career aptitude test at school had led to a very unusual follow-up meeting. A woman in a modest gray suit had appeared at our front door one evening, introducing herself as a government liaison for exceptional students. She'd spoken privately with my parents for 20 minutes, then asked to meet with me. "Your analytical scores are quite remarkable," she'd said, sitting across from me in our living room, while my parents listened from the kitchen. "We have programs for students with your particular skill set, accelerated learning opportunities that most people never hear about." My parents had been skeptical but intrigued when she mentioned full scholarships and guaranteed career placement. The paperwork she left behind was official enough to impress my father's legal eye, but vague enough that no one asked too many detailed questions. What followed were 3 summers of what my family believed were academic enrichment camps. In reality, they were intensive training programs that taught me skills no civilian university would offer. Languages that weren't offered in any American classroom. Computer systems that didn't exist in the commercial world. Analysis techniques for information that never appeared in newspapers. The other students in these programs came from similar backgrounds: bright kids, whose families assumed they were attending advanced STEM camps or international study programs. We learned early that discretion wasn't just encouraged, it was essential. Our instructors never used their real name. Our training locations changed every few weeks. Even among ourselves, we rarely shared details about our home life. By the time I graduated high school, I'd been accepted to Georgetown's School of Foreign Service, a respectable choice that satisfied my parents' desire for me to pursue something practical in government. What they didn't know was that my acceptance had been arranged through channels that had nothing to do with my SAT scores or application essay. College became an elaborate cover story. I attended enough classes to maintain good grades and keep my parents happy. But my real education happened during study abroad. Semesters that took me to places where Georgetown students definitely weren't supposed to go. When I told my family I was spending a semester in Prague studying European political systems, I was actually in 3 countries over, learning how to track weapons shipments through black market network. The hardest part wasn't the secrecy, it was watching my family's assumptions about me solidify into fact. Rebecca graduated summa cum laude and was immediately accepted to Harvard Law, exactly as everyone expected. I graduated with a respectable but unremarkable GPA in international relations, which my parents saw as confirmation that I was academically adequate, but not exceptional. At family gatherings, the introductions always followed the same pattern. This is our daughter Rebecca. She's at Harvard Law, top of her class, and this is Charlotte. She studied political science. She's still exploring her options. Still exploring my options. If they only knew. The job I eventually took was with something called the International Development Research Institute, a think tank with offices in Washington, D.C., that specialized in policy analysis and strategic consulting. My parents were relieved that I'd found steady employment, even if they didn't entirely understand what I did all day. When people asked, my mother would explain that I worked in government research, in a tone that suggested it was respectable but not particularly exciting. My father occasionally asked if there were opportunities for advancement, whether I might consider law school, if the work was challenging enough for someone with my education. I always gave vague but positive answers. Yes, there were opportunities. No, I didn't need law school for my career path. Yes, the work was definitely challenging. What I couldn't tell him was that my policy analysis involved briefings that started with phrases like actionable intelligence suggests and satellite imagery confirms. My strategic consulting meant developing response plans for scenarios that most people hoped would never happen. The Research Institute was real, but it was funded through budget lines that didn't appear in public documents. Rebecca, meanwhile, was thriving exactly as everyone predicted. Law review at Harvard, summer internships at firms where starting salaries exceeded what most families earned in a year. She called home every Sunday with updates on her progress, and my parents shared every detail with anyone who would listen. I called home every Sunday too, but my updates were necessarily limited. Work is going well. Yes, I'm learning a lot. No, I can't really discuss the details. Client confidentiality, you understand. The distance between my real life and my family's perception of it grew wider each year. When Rebecca won a prestigious moot court competition, the local newspaper ran a feature story about the Thompson family's legal legacy. When I received commendations for work I couldn't discuss, there were no newspaper articles. At Rebecca's law school graduation, my parents invited extended family, took hundreds of photos and hosted a celebration dinner at the most expensive restaurant in Boston. When I completed my advanced certifications in crisis management and international security, I marked the occasion alone in a hotel room in a city I wasn't supposed to be in. The pattern was so established that none of us questioned it anymore. Rebecca was the success story. I was the adequate daughter who'd found decent work but nothing worth celebrating. They loved me, I knew that, but they'd stopped expecting extraordinary things from me years ago, which made it particularly ironic that extraordinary things had become my specialty. The morning of Rebecca's college graduation, I almost didn't go. I was supposed to be in Frankfurt for a conference that couldn't be rescheduled, but I'd managed to arrange coverage so I could fly back for the ceremony. My family didn't know about the last-minute travel complications, and I'd decided not to mention them. They had enough to focus on with Rebecca's big day. I arrived at the university just as the processional was beginning. The parking lots were full, and by the time I found the auditorium most of the seats were taken. I spotted my parents in the third row, beaming with pride, but there was no empty seat beside them, no space saved for their other daughter. It wasn't malicious, they simply hadn't expected me to make it. I'd been traveling so much for work lately, missing family dinners and arriving late to holiday celebrations. They'd probably assumed I wouldn't be able to get away from whatever research project was keeping me busy. So I stood in the back, watching my sister accept her diploma, and listening to my parents' proud cheers from the crowd. When the ceremony ended and families flowed onto the stage for photos, I quietly slipped out through the side exit. 2 days later, everything changed. The call came at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, not unusual in my line of work, but the voice on the other end was one I hadn't heard in 6 months. Director Morrison, speaking in the clipped, urgent tone that meant someone important was about to have a very bad day. "Charlotte, we need you in DC immediately. There's been a development." I was already reaching for my go bag before he finished the sentence. In my world, development was code for everything you thought you knew just became obsolete. I'd learned to keep essentials packed at all times: 3 days of clothes, electronics, documents that would get me into places most people couldn't pronounce. "How immediate?" I asked, pulling on jeans and checking my phone for flight options. "There's a car outside your building. We'll brief you en route to Andrews Air Force Base." That meant military transport, which meant whatever was happening couldn't wait for commercial flights. I grabbed my jacket and headed for the door, my mind already shifting into operational mode. Personal life off, professional focus on. The sedan was black, unremarkable, with government plates that most people wouldn't notice. The driver nodded as I got in, but didn't speak. Professional courtesy in our business: the less everyone knew about everyone else's assignments, the safer we all stayed. During the 40-minute ride to Andrews, Morrison filled me in through an encrypted phone line. 3 weeks earlier, intelligence analysts had detected unusual communications patterns between several foreign entities. Nothing dramatic enough to trigger immediate alerts, just slight deviations from normal traffic that suggested coordination. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. "We thought it was routine intelligence gathering," Morrison explained. "Standard reconnaissance that we monitor but don't usually act on. Then yesterday, one of our assets in Eastern Europe went silent." Assets going silent happen sometimes. Equipment failures, extraction procedures, occasionally worse outcomes that we all understood, but rarely discussed. But this asset had been tracking the same communication patterns, and the timing suggested his disappearance wasn't coincidental. The pattern analysis points to something larger. Morrison continued. "Coordinated surveillance of multiple U.S. installations, with particular focus on research facilities that work on projects you've had clearance for." That narrowed the field considerably. My clearance level gave me access to information that existed in maybe a dozen facilities nationwide, all working on technologies that wouldn't appear in public for years, if ever. Someone was mapping our most sensitive operations, which meant someone knew exactly what to look for. The flight to Washington was brief but thorough. Morrison's team had prepared a comprehensive briefing package that painted a picture of methodical, patient intelligence gathering. Whoever was behind this had been watching our research programs for months, possibly longer. They knew which facilities housed which projects, which personnel had access to what information, even which security protocols were used at different locations. "The sophistication suggests state-level resources," Morrison said, as we reviewed satellite imagery that showed surveillance equipment positioned near 3 different research installations. "But the coordination suggests something more focused than typical government intelligence operations." We landed at a private airfield outside DC as the sun was coming up. Another unremarkable sedan, another silent driver, another encrypted briefing during the drive to a building whose address wouldn't appear on any public directory. The operations center was already in full activity. When we arrived, analysts at computer workstations, secure phone lines connecting to field operatives, digital displays showing real-time intelligence from sources I wasn't cleared to identify. The controlled chaos of a major operation in its early stages. "Charlotte, good to see you." The voice belonged to Deputy Director Sarah Chen, a woman whose calm demeanor masked one of the sharpest analytical minds in the intelligence community. We'd worked together on 3 previous operations, each one more complex than the last. "Sarah, what's our timeline?" "Compressed. We've identified the likely target of all this surveillance, and it's not what we initially expected." She led me to a secure conference room where additional team members were already assembled. They're not after our research data, they're after our researchers. The briefing that followed revealed an operation more sophisticated than anything I'd encountered. Foreign operatives hadn't been trying to steal information. They'd been mapping personnel, identifying key individuals, whose work was critical to ongoing projects. The surveillance equipment near our facilities had been recording who entered and left, when they worked, what their daily routines looked like. They're planning extraction operations, Chen explained. Kidnapping key researchers to gain access to information that can't be stolen electronically. The communication patterns we detected were coordination meetings for a series of simultaneous operations. The timeline was aggressive. Intelligence suggested the operations would begin within the next 72 hours, targeting at least 6 researchers at 4 different facilities. The targets had been selected based on their access levels and the criticality of their work to national security projects. "Where do I fit?" I asked, though I was already beginning to understand. Morrison leaned forward. "3 of the targeted researchers work on projects you've been consulting on. You know their work, their importance, and their vulnerabilities. We need someone who can anticipate how these operations will unfold and develop countermeasures." "But there's more," Chen added. "One of the researchers they're targeting is Dr. Michael Harrison at the Brookhaven facility. His work on quantum communication systems is 3 years ahead of anything comparable in the private sector. If they extract him, they gain access to technology that could fundamentally alter global intelligence capabilities." Dr. Harrison. I knew his work well, had consulted on security protocols for his laboratory, reviewed his research for potential vulnerabilities, participated in contingency planning for exactly this type of scenario. He was brilliant, dedicated, and completely unaware that his groundbreaking research had made him one of the most valuable targets in the world. "The challenge," Morrison continued, "is that we can't simply increase security at all facilities without alerting the operatives that we're aware of their plans. If they know we've detected their surveillance, they'll either accelerate their timeline or select different targets." "So, we need to catch them in the act," I said. "Exactly. But we also need to ensure none of the researchers are successfully extracted. One mistake, and we lose both the personnel and the intelligence advantage." The operation they outlined was intricate, requiring coordination between multiple agencies and precise timing across 4 states. We would monitor the operatives' final preparations, identify their extraction plans, and then neutralize them at the moment they attempted to execute. My role would be to coordinate security for the researchers while appearing to maintain normal operations. I'd need to work closely with facility security teams, brief researchers on enhanced protocols without revealing the full scope of the threat, and serve as the primary liaison between field operatives and command. "There's one more element," Chen said, her tone shifting to something more serious. "We believe one of the operatives may have inside information about our standard security procedures. Someone with access to classified protocols has been providing intelligence about how we typically respond to threats. An inside source." That complicated everything. It meant someone with clearance had been compromised, either through recruitment or coercion. It also meant that standard operating procedures couldn't be trusted. The operatives would anticipate our typical responses. "Do we have suspects?" I asked. "We're working on it. For now, we're operating under the assumption that anyone with access to relevant information could potentially be compromised. The good news is that your involvement in this operation hasn't been documented in standard channels. As far as official records show, you're still working on routine policy analysis." My cover story, in other words, had become my operational advantage. While other operatives' assignments were logged in systems that could potentially be accessed, my actual work remained invisible to anyone who wasn't specifically cleared for this operation. The next 18 hours involved intensive planning. We mapped facility layouts, analyzed personnel schedules, developed communication protocols that wouldn't trigger attention from potential inside sources. Every detail had to account for the possibility that our standard procedures were being monitored. I reviewed security footage from all 4 targeted facilities, looking for patterns that might reveal how the operatives had conducted their surveillance. The sophistication was impressive. They'd positioned equipment in locations that provided optimal coverage while remaining invisible to routine security sweeps. They've been watching for at least 3 months, I told the analysis team after reviewing weeks of footage. Long enough to map not just the facilities but the personalities and habits of individual researchers. They know who stays late, who takes predictable routes home, who has family obligations that create scheduling patterns. Chin nodded grimly, which means they've had time to develop highly specific extraction plans for each target. This isn't a general operation. It's 6 separate customized kidnapping scenarios designed to maximize success probability. As the second day of planning concluded, Morrison pulled me aside for a private conversation. "Charlotte, there's something else you need to know. The Brookhaven facility where Dr. Harrison works, it's 30 miles from your hometown. If the operation there goes wrong, if we can't contain it cleanly, there could be secondary effects that impact civilian areas. My hometown, where my family lived, where Rebecca was probably already planning her next career milestone, while my parents beamed with pride at their accomplished daughter." "Understood," I said, though my throat felt tight. "I know this adds a personal element that we usually try to avoid. If you want to request reassignment to one of the other facilities." "No," I said quickly. "I know the area, I know the facility, and I know Dr. Harrison's work better than anyone else on the team. I'm the right person for this assignment." Morrison nodded. "I hoped you'd say that, but Charlotte? Your family doesn't know what you do. If this operation becomes public knowledge, that might change." He was right. If something went wrong, if the operation became a news story, my involvement might be revealed. My parents would learn that their adequate daughter who worked in government research had actually been protecting national security assets for years. "I'll deal with that if it happens," I said. "Right now, Dr. Harrison and the other researchers are the priority." But as I returned to my hotel room that night, I couldn't help wondering what my family would think if they knew. Would they be proud? Shocked? Would they understand why I'd never told them the truth? 24 hours later, I was about to find out. The Brookhaven Research Facility sat on 200 acres of carefully manicured grounds, looking more like a corporate campus than one of the most secure research installations in the country. From the outside, visitors saw modern buildings, well-maintained landscaping, and a modest security checkpoint that seemed appropriate for any technology company. What they couldn't see were the underground levels, the electromagnetic shielding, or the fact that the landscaping contained some of the most sophisticated surveillance equipment ever developed. I arrived at 6:30 a.m., 2 hours before Dr. Harrison's usual schedule, using credentials that identified me as a security consultant, conducting a routine assessment. The cover story was thin but sufficient. Facilities like Brookhaven regularly hosted consultants, and my paperwork was authentic enough to pass administrative scrutiny. The real challenge was briefing Dr. Harrison without revealing the full scope of the threat. He needed to understand that his safety was at risk, but too much information would change his behavior in ways that might alert the operatives conducting surveillance. "Dr. Harrison, I'm Charlotte Morgan from Strategic Security Solutions," I said, using the cover identity that had been established for this operation. "I'm here to review protocols for your laboratory and discuss some enhanced security measures." Michael Harrison was exactly what I'd expected from his file, mid-40s, slightly disheveled, with the intense focus of someone whose mind was usually occupied by problems most people couldn't comprehend. His laboratory was an organized chaos of quantum computing equipment, whiteboards covered in equations, and computer screens displaying data streams that represented years of breakthrough research. "Security measures?" He looked puzzled. "Is there a specific concern?" "We've detected some unusual electronic signatures near the facility," I said, which was technically true. Nothing immediately threatening, but enough to warrant updating our protocols. I'll need to review your daily routines and suggest some modifications that will improve overall security without impacting your research. For the next hour, I walked through his laboratory, asking questions about his schedule, his team, his procedures for handling classified materials. To him, it seemed like a standard security review. To me, it was reconnaissance. Understanding how foreign operatives might approach an extraction, what vulnerabilities they would exploit, how they might time an operation to maximize success. Your research is quite impressive, I said, reviewing equipment that represented technology years ahead of anything in the public sector. How many people have access to this laboratory? Just my team of 4, plus myself. And occasionally consultants like yourself, when the security office requests reviews. He paused, looking at me more carefully. You seem very knowledgeable about quantum systems for a security consultant. I have a background in technology protection, I said smoothly. Part of effective security is understanding what we're protecting. It was a careful balance, demonstrating enough knowledge to maintain credibility while avoiding questions about my actual background. Dr. Harrison seemed satisfied with the explanation, but I could tell his analytical mind was filing away details about our conversation. Around 10 a.m., the first members of his research team arrived. Dr. Sarah Kim, a quantum physicist who'd been working on communication protocols, James Rodriguez, a computer scientist specializing in encryption algorithms, Lisa Chen, a materials engineer focused on quantum storage systems, and David Park, a recent addition to the team whose background included work at 3 other government research facilities. I observed each team member carefully, looking for anything that seemed unusual. The inside source that Chen had mentioned could be anyone with access to facility information, and Dr. Harrison's team had clearance levels that would make them valuable targets for recruitment. Dr. Morgan will be observing our procedures today, Dr. Harrison explained to his team. She's conducting a security review, so please maintain normal operations. Normal operations, it turned out, involved work that would revolutionize global communications if it ever reached operational status. The team was developing quantum encryption systems that would make current cybersecurity measures obsolete. Their research represented a technological advantage that could shift the balance of power between nations. Watching them work, I understood why foreign operatives had spent months planning extraction operations. Dr. Harrison's knowledge alone was valuable, but his entire team represented a collective expertise that couldn't be replicated quickly. Around noon, my earpiece crackled with an encrypted transmission from the operations center. Overwatch to Phoenix, came Chen's voice, using the call sign assigned for this operation. We have movement at the Denver facility. 2 vehicles, 4 occupants, conducting what appears to be final reconnaissance. Denver was one of the other targeted facilities. If operatives there were beginning final preparations, it meant the timeline was accelerating. Phoenix copies, I whispered, moving to a corner of the laboratory where my conversation wouldn't be overheard. Any change to our timeline? Negative. Maintain current positions. All units report ready status. I spent the afternoon conducting interviews with each team member, ostensibly reviewing security protocols but actually assessing their awareness levels and looking for any signs of compromise. Dr. Kim was focused entirely on her research, showing no signs of stress or unusual behavior. Rodriguez seemed slightly nervous, but that could be explained by having a security consultant scrutinizing his work. Chen answered questions efficiently and returned immediately to her equipment. David Park was different. He was cooperative, answered all questions appropriately, but something about his demeanor suggested heightened awareness. When I asked about his background, he provided information that matched his file exactly, like someone who'd rehearsed responses to anticipated questions. How long have you been working with Dr. Harrison's team? I asked. 8 months. I transferred from the Livermore facility when this position opened up. And your previous work at Livermore? Quantum networking protocols. Similar to what we're developing here but with a different focus. His answers were accurate but sterile. Most researchers, when discussing their work, showed enthusiasm that was difficult to fake. Park's responses felt calculated. Overwatch to Phoenix, came another transmission around 3 p.m. Denver team reports unusual electronic signatures, possible jamming equipment being tested, Electronic jamming would be used to disrupt facility communications during an extraction operation. If they were testing equipment, it meant operations could begin at any time. Phoenix to Overwatch. Any indication of timeline acceleration? All units report increased activity. Recommend elevated alert status. I spent the rest of the afternoon positioning myself to observe both the research team and the facility's external security measures. If extraction operations were imminent, they would likely occur during shift changes or other times when security protocols were in transition. Around 5 p.m., most of the research team began their end-of-day procedures. Dr. Harrison stayed late, as his file indicated he usually did. Dr. Kim left promptly at 5:15. Rodriguez and Chen left together around 5:30, discussing plans to continue their work from home. David Park lingered, claiming he needed to finish calibrating equipment that would require another hour of work. "I can stay if you need additional security presence," I offered to Dr. Harrison. "That's not necessary. David and I will probably work until 7 or 8, then lock up." Standard procedure. Standard procedure that anyone conducting surveillance would have observed and documented. If operatives were planning an extraction during evening hours, they would know exactly when the facility would have minimal staffing. At 6:30, my earpiece activated again. Overwatch to all units. Denver facility reports unscheduled power outage, affecting external communications. Chicago facility reports vehicle accident blocking primary access road. Possible coordinated diversions. My pulse quickened. Simultaneous incidents at multiple facilities meant the operations were beginning. Power outages and blocked access roads were standard tactics for isolating targets and limiting response capabilities. Phoenix to Overwatch. Status at my location? Maintain position. No incidents reported, but we're detecting increased electronic activity, consistent with surveillance equipment activation. They were watching. Final preparations before an extraction attempt. I needed to position myself where I could observe external approaches while maintaining visual contact with Dr. Harrison and Park. "Dr. Harrison, I'm going to review perimeter security systems," I said. "I'll be checking equipment in the corridor and lobby areas." "Of course. David and I will be here for at least another hour." I moved through the facility's corridors, checking sightlines and communication systems while staying alert for any signs of approaching operatives. The building felt different in the evening, quieter, with longer shadows and fewer personnel. At 7:15, external motion sensors detected movement in the wooded area north of the facility, then movement from the south parking area, coordinated approach from multiple directions. Overwatch to Phoenix. We have visual confirmation. 6 operatives, professional equipment, moving toward your facility through planned approach routes. This was it. The extraction attempt was beginning. Phoenix copies. Dr. Harrison and David Park are still in the main laboratory. What's the status of our backup units? Positioned and ready. Remember, we need to let them initiate contact before we can act. Rules of engagement remain in effect. Rules of engagement meant we couldn't move against the operatives until they committed an actionable offense. We had to wait for them to enter the facility and attempt the extraction before we could intervene. I made my way back toward the laboratory, moving quietly through corridors that suddenly felt like a maze. In a few minutes, foreign operatives would enter this building with the goal of kidnapping one of the most valuable researchers in the country, and I was the only thing standing between them and success. My earpiece crackled one more time. All units, final positions, operation is live. The next few minutes would determine whether years of planning and months of surveillance would succeed, or whether we could protect Dr. Harrison and prevent a devastating intelligence loss. I reached the laboratory corridor just as the building's lights flickered, a sign that external power systems were being interfered with. It was starting. The power flickered twice more, then stabilized. Emergency lighting kicked in along the corridors, casting everything in an amber glow that made shadows deeper and sightlines uncertain. I pressed myself against the wall near the laboratory entrance, where I could observe both the hallway and the room where Dr. Harrison and David Park continued working. Through the reinforced glass, I watched Dr. Harrison adjust settings on a quantum processor that hummed with barely contained energy. David Park stood at a computer terminal, but his posture had changed. Instead of the focused concentration he'd displayed all day, he seemed alert, listening for something beyond the laboratory walls. My earpiece delivered updates in Chan's calm, professional voice. Phoenix, operatives have breached the perimeter fence at 2 points. Estimate 3 minutes to build entry. Backup units are in position but maintaining distance per protocol. 3 minutes. In a perfect world, that would be enough time to evacuate Dr. Harrison and secure the facility. But this wasn't a perfect world. It was a carefully orchestrated operation where every variable had been planned months in advance. Dr. Harrison. I called through the laboratory door, keeping my voice level. I need you to step away from your equipment for a moment. He looked up, confused. Is there a problem? Just a precautionary measure. Please move toward the back of the laboratory. David Park's head snapped toward me, and for the first time his carefully maintained cover cracked. The expression that crossed his face wasn't confusion. It was calculation. He knew exactly what was happening. Actually, Dr. Harrison, Park said smoothly, you should probably stay where you are. Charlotte, why don't you join us here? The laboratory door required keycard access from the outside, but it could be opened from within by anyone inside. Park was positioning himself between Dr. Harrison and the exit, while trying to draw me into a contained space. Classic extraction protocol: isolate the target and eliminate variables. I think I'll stay out here, I said, my hand moving to the emergency communication panel mounted beside the door. One touch would trigger facility-wide lockdown procedures, but it would also alert any inside sources that we were aware of the operation. Phoenix, be advised, came Chen's voice. Electronic jamming has begun. External communications are being disrupted. We're tracking operatives through thermal imaging. The jamming explained why the laboratory's computer systems were starting to display connection errors. Dr. Harrison noticed it too, moving between terminals with growing concern. The network's failing, he said. All our external connections are down. That's not a network problem. I told him. Dr. Harrison, I need you to listen carefully. There are people trying to break into this facility, and you're their target. We need to move you to a secure location immediately. Park stepped closer to Dr. Harrison, his hand moving to his jacket pocket. Actually, Charlotte, I think you're overreacting. These systems fail all the time. Michael, why don't we continue our work? I'm sure the network will stabilize. Dr. Harrison looked between us, the scientific mind processing the contradiction between our statements. Charlotte, are you saying this is some kind of attack? Yes. And David isn't who he claims to be. Park's facade finally dropped completely. His hand emerged from his pocket holding a device I recognized as a high-powered tranquilizer, designed to incapacitate without causing lasting harm. Extraction teams preferred conscious but compliant targets. Dr. Harrison, please step away from Charlotte, Park said, his voice now carrying a slight accent that hadn't been present during our earlier conversations. She's not here to protect you. Actually, I am. I moved to block Park's line of sight to Dr. Harrison while activating the emergency lockdown panel. Alarms began blaring throughout the facility, red lights flashing in corridors designed to guide personnel to secure areas. Park raised the tranquilizer device, but hesitated. In the confined space of the laboratory, any missed shot could damage equipment worth millions of dollars and years of research. More importantly, his extraction team would need Dr. Harrison conscious and cooperative for transport. Phoenix, lockdown initiated, I reported through my earpiece. Inside source confirmed, as David Park. Operatives should be reaching building entry points now. Confirmed. 2 operatives at the main entrance. Attempting to override electronic locks. 3 more, approaching the laboratory wing through the service corridor. Backup units moving to intercept. Dr. Harrison pressed himself against the far wall, finally understanding that his carefully controlled research environment had become a battlefield. Who are you people? He demanded. Someone trying to keep you safe," I said, not taking my eyes off Park. "He's someone trying to kidnap you." Park smiled grimly. "The extraction team will be here in 90 seconds. You can't hold this position against 6 trained operatives." He was right about the numbers, but wrong about my resources. What Park didn't know was that I wasn't just a security consultant, conducting a routine review. The credentials I'd used to access the facility were legitimate, but they represented only a fraction of my actual clearance level. Overwatch. This is Phoenix requesting immediate authorization for enhanced response protocols. Chen's response was immediate. Authorization granted. Full discretionary powers in effect. Enhanced response protocols meant I was no longer limited to defensive measures. I could take whatever action was necessary to protect Dr. Harrison and prevent the extraction, regardless of standard engagement rules. The first explosion came from the main entrance. Shaped charges designed to breach reinforced security doors without damaging the facility's structural integrity. Professional work that suggested extensive preparation and high-quality equipment. Second breach at service entrance, reported my earpiece. Operatives are inside the building. Park stepped toward Dr. Harrison, tranquilizer device ready. "Michael, we can do this easily, or we can do it the hard way. Your cooperation will ensure this goes smoothly. The hard way it is," I said, activating a secondary control panel that Park hadn't noticed during his months of surveillance. The laboratory's emergency systems included more than just lockdown procedures. Research facilities working on classified projects had security measures that went beyond standard commercial systems. Electromagnetic pulse generators designed to protect sensitive equipment could also disable unauthorized electronic devices. Sound suppression systems meant to contain experimental noise could disorient intruders, and emergency containment protocols could seal sections of the facility completely. The EMP pulse disabled Park's tranquilizer device, along with most of the laboratory's non-hardened equipment. Emergency lighting switched to backup power as computerized systems reset. Park found himself holding a useless piece of electronics while standing in a room that had suddenly become a secure containment area. "What did you do?" Dr. Harrison asked, staring at darkened computer screens. "Bought us time," I said. "The EMP will reset in 60 seconds, but it's disabled all unauthorized electronic devices. And the containment protocol means this laboratory is now isolated from the rest of the building." Park's training kicked in. Without his electronic weapon, he reverted to physical options, moving toward Dr. Harrison with the intent to secure him manually. But 8 months of posing as a researcher hadn't maintained his operational conditioning, while my recent training exercises had kept me sharp. The fight was brief and decisive. Park had techniques but no recent practice. I had both. "Phoenix to Overwatch," I reported while zip-tying Park's hands with restraints from my equipment kit. "Inside source neutralized. Dr. Harrison is secure in the laboratory. What's the status of the extraction team?" 4 operatives contained at entry points by backup units. 2 operatives reached the laboratory corridor, but couldn't breach containment doors. Requesting instructions for final disposition. Through the laboratory's reinforced windows, I could see figures in tactical gear examining the sealed entrance. They had equipment that could eventually breach the containment system, but it would take time. They didn't have. More importantly, their electronic jamming equipment had been disrupted by the EMP pulse, which meant facility communications were being restored. "Dr. Harrison, I need you to stay exactly where you are for the next few minutes. Don't touch any equipment. Don't move toward the doors. Just remain in the center of the room." "Are you going to explain what's happening?" he asked. "Foreign operatives have been planning to kidnap you for months. David Park was gathering intelligence about your routines and security procedures. Tonight was their extraction attempt." He stared at Park, who was conscious but restrained on the laboratory floor. "He's been working with my team for 8 months. He's been preparing for this operation for 8 months. Every day, learning your schedule, mapping the facility, reporting your research progress to handlers who planned this extraction." The implications were staggering. 8 months of compromised security with an inside source documenting every aspect of the facility's most sensitive research. Park had been in position to observe not just Dr. Harrison's work, but the work of every researcher who'd accessed the laboratory. "Phoenix, we have a problem," came Chen's voice. "Satellite imagery shows additional vehicles approaching the facility. Looks like a secondary extraction team, a backup plan." Professional extraction operations always included contingencies for primary team failure. While we'd been focused on the immediate threat, another team had been positioned to implement alternative extraction methods. "How many vehicles?" "3 SUVs, approximately 12 personnel. They're approaching from the north access road, avoiding the areas where we've contained the primary team." 12 additional operatives meant we were facing a coordinated operation much larger than originally anticipated. The facility's security systems could contain the laboratory and protect Harrison temporarily, but they couldn't withstand a prolonged assault by multiple teams with professional equipment. "Overwatch, recommend immediate evacuation protocols. We need to extract Dr. Harrison before the secondary team reaches operational position." "Negative, Phoenix. Evacuation routes are compromised. The secondary team is positioned to intercept any attempt to move Dr. Harrison off facility grounds." We were trapped. The laboratory was secure but surrounded. Dr. Harrison was safe but couldn't be moved. And somewhere in the facility, operatives with specialized extraction equipment were working to breach our containment system. "There is one option," Chen continued. "We can implement emergency protocols that will bring additional resources, but it will require revealing the full scope of this operation." Emergency protocols meant involving assets and personnel whose existence wasn't publicly acknowledged. It meant abandoning operational security in favor of overwhelming force. And it meant that what had begun as a covert protection mission would become a very public demonstration of government capabilities. Time frame for secondary team arrival: 15 minutes. 15 minutes to decide whether to maintain operational secrecy or save Dr. Harrison's life and protect years of critical research. "Authorize emergency protocols," I said. "Full escalation." "Confirmed. Emergency protocols activated." "Phoenix, you should know this is going to draw attention at the highest levels of government." "The highest levels." That could mean anything from cabinet secretaries to the president himself. What had started as a protection mission was about to become a national security incident that would be briefed in the White House Situation Room. But Dr. Harrison would be safe. His research would remain secure. And foreign operatives would learn that some targets were protected by resources they couldn't anticipate. In the distance, I could hear the sound of aircraft approaching. The sound started as a distant rumble, barely audible over the facility's emergency alarms, but it grew steadily louder and more distinct, the unmistakable rhythm of military helicopters approaching in formation. Not the single aircraft you'd expect for a routine operation, but multiple rotorcraft moving with the precision that suggested serious government resources. "Phoenix, be advised." Chan's voice carried a new urgency. "You have incoming support assets. Marine Force Recon, Delta Force, and what appears to be a very special operations unit whose designation I'm not cleared to identify." Through the laboratory's windows, I could see the secondary extraction team's vehicles had stopped their approach. Professional operatives knew the sound of military helicopters, and they understood what multiple aircraft meant. Their carefully planned operation was about to face opposition they hadn't anticipated. Dr. Harrison pressed his face against the reinforced glass, staring at the sky. "Those are military helicopters. Why is the military involved in this?" "Because your research is more important than you realized," I told him. "And because the people trying to kidnap you represent a threat to national security." The first helicopter became visible through the facility's skylight, a UH-60 Blackhawk painted in the flat gray colors that meant special operations. It circled the facility once, then settled into a landing pattern on the main parking area. Before its wheels touched the ground, tactical teams were already rappelling from its sides. "Phoenix, this is Colonel James Mitchell." Commanding the response force came a new voice through my earpiece. "We have eyes on the facility and have identified multiple hostile positions. What's your status?" "Laboratory secure, Dr. Harrison safe. Inside source neutralized. Secondary extraction team approximately 12 personnel in 3 vehicles. positioned north of the facility. Copy. We're implementing a full perimeter around the facility. No one enters or leaves without authorization. Through the windows, I watched as more helicopters landed. Not just transport aircraft, but attack helicopters taking overwatch positions around the facility's perimeter. The response was overwhelming, far more firepower than necessary to handle 2 extraction teams, no matter how professional. This seems like more resources than we need, I said to Chen through my earpiece. There's something you should know, Phoenix. This operation has been briefed at the presidential level. The quantum communication research Dr. Harrison is conducting isn't just important. It's critical to a classified defense initiative that goes beyond anything in your previous briefings. Presidential level. That meant the Oval Office, the National Security Council, possibly the president himself. What had begun as a protection mission for a valuable researcher had escalated into an operation that commanded the attention of the highest levels of government. The sound of explosions echoed from the facility's main entrance as the response teams breached areas where operatives had entrenched themselves. Professional, controlled demolitions designed to neutralize threats without damaging the research infrastructure. Dr. Harrison, I said, I need you to remain calm, but this situation is about to become very intense. Military personnel are going to secure this facility, and there will be a lot of activity. Just stay where you are and follow any instructions you're given. He nodded, but his face was pale. Charlotte, who are you really? Security consultants don't coordinate military operations. Before I could answer, the laboratory's containment system disengaged. The sealed doors unlocked as facility security systems recognized authorized military override codes. But instead of extraction teams forcing their way in, the first figures through the door wore American military uniforms. Ma'am, Colonel Mitchell, the lead soldier said, snapping to attention when he saw me. The facility is secure. All hostile operatives have been contained or neutralized. The formal military bearing was unmistakable. This wasn't a soldier addressing a civilian consultant. It was a colonel showing respect to someone with authority he recognized. Dr. Harrison noticed it too. His eyes moved between the soldier's respectful posture and my calm acceptance of it. Charlotte, why is a military colonel calling you ma'am like that? Because there are things about this situation you don't know yet, I said. More soldiers entered the laboratory, but their role wasn't to secure Dr. Harrison. It was to escort him safely while maintaining a protective perimeter around me. The subtle but unmistakable deference in their behavior suggested they'd been briefed about who I was and what authority I carried. Phoenix, this is Overwatch. Chen's voice carried a tone I'd never heard before. You have priority communication incoming. Presidential level. Presidential level. Communication meant someone in the White House Situation Room wanted to speak directly with the operative in charge of this mission. But it also meant the operational security that had protected my identity was about to end. Dr. Harrison, I'm going to need you to step outside the laboratory for a few minutes, I said. Colonel Mitchell will ensure your safety. I think I deserve an explanation first, he said, showing the same determination that had made him a brilliant researcher. My laboratory has been invaded. My colleague was apparently a foreign agent, and now military forces are securing my facility. I want to know what's really going on. Colonel Mitchell stepped forward. Sir, we'll provide a complete briefing once the situation is fully contained. Right now, we need to ensure your continued safety. Actually, I said, making a decision that would change everything. Dr. Harrison should hear this. He's been at the center of this operation for months without knowing it. He deserves to understand why. My earpiece activated with an encrypted connection that bypassed normal communication channels. The voice that came through was one I'd heard in briefings, but never directly. White House Communications. This is the White House Situation Room. We're connecting you with the President. The President of the United States. Wanting to speak directly with the operative who just prevented a major intelligence breach. Dr. Harrison's eyes widened as he heard the transmission through speakers that Colonel Mitchell had activated. This is President Williams, came the familiar voice I'd heard in countless press conferences and addresses to the nation. Am I speaking with the operative in charge of protecting Dr. Harrison? Yes, Mr. President. This is Agent Phoenix. Dr. Harrison is secure, and the extraction operation has been neutralized. Outstanding work. Agent Phoenix, I understand this operation required resources at the highest classification levels. Can you confirm that Dr. Harrison's research remains secure? Confirmed, Mr. President. All research data and materials are secure. The inside source has been contained, and all extraction operatives are in custody. Agent Phoenix, your handling of this situation has prevented a catastrophic intelligence loss. The quantum communication research Dr. Harrison is conducting is critical to Project Quantum Shield, a defense initiative that will revolutionize our national security capabilities. Project Quantum Shield. Even Dr. Harrison looked surprised. Apparently, his research was part of a larger defense program he hadn't been told about. Mr. President, I said. Dr. Harrison is present and hearing this briefing. He wasn't aware of the broader defense applications of his research. Dr. Harrison, the President's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. Your work on quantum communication systems represents the most significant advancement in secure communications technology in decades. The research you've been conducting will provide America with communication capabilities that cannot be intercepted or compromised by any known technology. Dr. Harrison stared at the communication equipment, struggling to process that the President was personally briefing him about his own research. Mr. President, I had no idea the applications were so extensive. The classified nature of Project Quantum Shield required that you focus on the technical research while others handled security and strategic implementation. But Agent Phoenix has ensured that your work remains protected and can continue without compromise. Colonel Mitchell stepped closer to me, his expression showing recognition that went beyond military protocol. Agent Phoenix, I've been ordered to provide any resources you require for continued security operations. The formal deference made it clear that my authority in this situation came from very high levels of government. Dr. Harrison was beginning to understand that the security consultant who'd spent the day reviewing his laboratory was something far more significant. Agent Phoenix, the President continued, given the successful resolution of this operation and the critical importance of Dr. Harrison's continued research, I'm authorizing the establishment of a permanent security detail for Project Quantum Shield. You'll have command authority over all security aspects of the program. Command authority over a presidential-level defense program. The kind of responsibility that required clearance levels most people didn't know existed. Dr. Harrison was staring at me with an expression of complete bewilderment. Understood, Mr. President. I'll coordinate with Dr. Harrison to ensure his research can continue with appropriate security measures. Excellent. Agent Phoenix, the Joint Chiefs will be briefed on this operation within the hour. Your actions today have protected one of our most critical defense programs. The connection ended, leaving the laboratory in silence except for the distant sound of helicopters and the continuing activities of the response teams securing the facility. Dr. Harrison finally spoke. Agent Phoenix? Charlotte? Who are you really? Colonel Mitchell answered before I could. Sir? Agent Phoenix is a senior operative with clearance levels that authorize her to coordinate protection for the most sensitive government programs. Today's operation was conducted under her command. Command? Dr. Harrison looked around the laboratory at the military personnel maintaining security positions, at the sophisticated equipment that had contained the extraction teams. You commanded all of this. The protection of your research requires resources that most people don't know exist, I said. Your work on quantum communication isn't just important, it's critical to national defense programs at the highest classification levels. And you've been protecting me all day without telling me any of this. Until tonight, you didn't need to know. But the extraction attempt changed everything. The operational security that protected both you and the program required that you remain unaware of the broader implications of your research. Colonel Mitchell received a communication through his own earpiece, then turned to me. Agent Phoenix, we have confirmation that all hostile operatives are in custody. The facility is secure, and Dr. Harrison's research materials are protected. Outstanding. What's the status of the secondary extraction team? Contained without engagement. When our aircraft arrived, they abandoned their vehicles and attempted to extract on foot. They were apprehended by perimeter teams before reaching the facility. Dr. Harrison shook his head slowly. This is insane. Yesterday I was a research scientist working on theoretical quantum systems. Today I find out I'm part of a presidential defense program being protected by government agents I didn't know existed. Dr. Harrison, I said, your research has always been this important. The only thing that's changed is that now you know it. Outside, the sound of helicopters was diminishing as some of the response aircraft departed, but the facility would never return to its previous security posture. Project Quantum Shield was now an acknowledged program, with resources that matched its importance. Agent Phoenix, Colonel Mitchell said, we have transport standing by to move Dr. Harrison to a more secure facility if required. That won't be necessary. This facility can be upgraded to provide appropriate security for continued research. Dr. Harrison's work is too important to interrupt. As I said it, I realized that my cover story, The Invisible Daughter Working in Government Research, was about to face its ultimate test. Because in 48 hours, my family would learn exactly what kind of research I'd been conducting for years. The aftermath of a major operation always involved paperwork, debriefings, and the careful reconstruction of events for official records. But this operation was different. Within 6 hours of the president's communication, I found myself in a secure conference room at the Pentagon, facing a panel that included the Secretary of Defense, the Director of National Intelligence, and 2 generals whose names appeared in classified briefings, but never in public documents. Agent Phoenix, Secretary of Defense Margaret Hayes began, your handling of the Brookhaven operation has been exemplary. The protection of Dr. Harrison and the security of Project Quantum Shield represents exactly the kind of success we need in operations of this classification level. The formal recognition felt strange after years of operations that ended with handshakes in empty conference rooms and commendations that went into files no one would ever read. But Project Quantum Shield had crossed a threshold, from covert protection to acknowledged strategic assets. Thank you, Madam Secretary. Dr. Harrison's research represents capabilities that justify the resources committed to its protection. Director of National Intelligence Thomas Bradley leaned forward. Agent Phoenix, there's an aspect of this operation that requires careful consideration. The scale of the response, the presidential involvement, and the military assets deployed have created a paper trail that will be difficult to classify indefinitely. He was right. Emergency protocols that brought in special forces, presidential communications, and Pentagon briefings created documentation that eventually found its way into congressional oversight and public accountability processes. The operational secrecy that had protected my identity for years was becoming unsustainable. Are you saying the operation will become public knowledge? I asked. We're saying that elements of it may become public through normal oversight processes, General Patricia Morrison replied. Congressional intelligence committees will be briefed on Project Quantum Shield within the next week. The successful prevention of a foreign extraction operation will be used as justification for increased funding and resources. Congressional briefings meant that aspects of the operation would eventually leak to media sources who specialized in intelligence reporting. The broad outlines, foreign operatives attempting to kidnap American researchers, successful intervention by government forces, would become news stories within weeks. What about operational personnel? I asked. Will individual identities be protected? Secretary Hayes nodded. Standard protocols will protect the identities of all operatives involved. However, the commanding officer of such a high-profile operation may face different considerations. Commanding officer. They were referring to me and the authority I'd exercised during the operation. Presidential communications, military coordination, and command decisions created a leadership profile that was harder to anonymize than standard operative activities. Agent Phoenix, Director Bradley continued, there's something else we need to discuss. Your background and qualifications have been reviewed at the highest levels. The successful command of this operation, combined with your previous service record, has resulted in a recommendation for advancement. Advancement in intelligence operations could mean many things: increased clearance levels, command positions, assignments that carried even higher classification levels. But the formal nature of this briefing suggested something more significant. "What kind of advancement?" I asked. General Morrison opened a folder marked with classification stamps. I recognized but had never seen applied to documents concerning my own career. "Agent Phoenix, you're being considered for appointment as Deputy Director of Strategic Operations, reporting directly to the Director of National Intelligence." Deputy Director. A position that would make me one of the senior-most intelligence officials in the government. My decisions would affect operations on multiple continents, and my authority would extend to resources that most people couldn't imagine. "The position requires Senate confirmation," Secretary Hayes added, "which means your identity would become part of the public record." Senate confirmation hearings. Public testimony. Congressional questioning about my background, qualifications, and experience. Everything I'd kept hidden from my family for years would become part of official government proceedings. "Madam Secretary, my family has no knowledge of my actual career. They believe I work for a policy research institute. We understand the personal complications," Director Bradley said. "But Agent Phoenix, your capabilities and experience make you uniquely qualified for this position." The President himself has endorsed the recommendation. The President, who had spoken with me directly during the Brookhaven operation and understood the authority I'd exercised. His endorsement carried weight that transcended normal promotion considerations. "What's the timeline for this decision?" I asked. "The formal nomination will be submitted to the Senate within 2 weeks." General Morrison replied, "Confirmation hearings would begin approximately 4 weeks after that. You'd need to prepare for public testimony about your qualifications and experience." Public testimony meant my family would learn everything, not through my explanation, but through news coverage of Senate hearings. They'd discover that their adequate daughter was being confirmed for one of the highest positions in American intelligence. "Agent Phoenix," Secretary Hayes said, "this advancement reflects not just your handling of the Brookhaven operation, but years of exceptional service in operations that have protected American interests worldwide. Your country needs leaders with your experience and judgment." The weight of the decision settled over me. Accept the position, and my family would finally understand what I'd been doing for years, but they'd learn it through news reports and congressional hearings. Decline, and I'd remain in operational roles that kept me invisible but limited my ability to affect change at the strategic level. "I'll need time to consider the implications," I said. "Of course, but Agent Phoenix, there's one more thing you should know. The success of the Brookhaven operation has already been briefed to key congressional leaders. Your name is being mentioned in classified sessions as the operative who prevented a catastrophic intelligence breach. My name, in congressional briefings, which meant it was already part of the political process that would eventually bring it into public view. Regardless of whether I accepted the promotion. The meeting concluded with handshakes and promises to provide whatever support I needed for the decision. But as I left the Pentagon, I realized the choice had already been made for me. The Brookhaven operation had pushed my career beyond the point where anonymity was sustainable. That evening, I sat in my apartment, staring at a phone that contained my family's contact information. Rebecca was probably celebrating another achievement at Harvard Law. My parents were likely sharing stories about their successful daughter with friends who asked about the Thompson family's latest accomplishments. I could call them. Explain everything before they learned it from news reports. Tell them about the years of classified operations, the missions that had taken me to places they couldn't imagine, the authority I'd exercised in situations they'd never hear about. Or I could wait. Let them discover the truth the same way the rest of the country would, through news coverage of my confirmation hearings, interviews with officials who praised my service, analysis pieces that explained the importance of positions they'd never known existed. My phone rang, interrupting the decision. The caller ID showed Morrison's secure line. "Agent Phoenix. There's been a development. The President wants to personally present you with the intelligence community's highest decoration for your handling of the Brookhaven operation." The ceremony will be conducted at the White House with full military honors. Full military honors. At the White House. The kind of ceremony that warranted news coverage and public acknowledgement of exceptional service. When is this ceremony scheduled? I asked. 2 days from now. Given the classified nature of your previous service, this will be the first public recognition of your contributions to national security. Public recognition. After years in the shadows, my service would be acknowledged in the most visible possible venue, a White House ceremony conducted with the protocol reserved for the most exceptional achievements. Agent Phoenix, the president has also requested that you be permitted to invite family members to attend the ceremony. Family members. My parents and Rebecca, sitting in the White House while the president personally recognized my service, learning simultaneously that their adequate daughter had been serving at the highest levels of government for years. I'll need to make some phone calls, I said. Of course. The White House social office will coordinate with any family members you'd like to invite. After Morrison ended the call, I sat in my apartment for a long time, holding the phone and thinking about the conversation I was about to have. In 48 hours, my family would sit in the White House while the Air Force Band played Hail to the Chief for a president who was personally honoring their daughter's service. The daughter they thought worked in policy research. The daughter who'd been invisible at family celebrations for years. The daughter who was about to receive the highest recognition the intelligence community could bestow. I dialed my mother's number, and for the first time in years prepared to tell my family the truth about who I really was. The phone call with my mother lasted exactly 12 minutes. 12 minutes to explain 7 years of classified service, multiple operations that had protected American interests worldwide, and the fact that her daughter, who worked in government research, was about to receive the Presidential Medal of Freedom at a White House ceremony. "Charlotte, I don't understand," she'd said, her voice small and confused. "You work for a think tank. You analyze policy papers." "No, Mom. I work for the intelligence community. I've been protecting national security assets and coordinating operations that can't be discussed publicly." The think tank was a cover story. The silence that followed stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. When she finally spoke again, her voice carried a mixture of disbelief and something that might have been pride. "The White House wants us there for a ceremony? The president is personally recognizing my service. You, Dad, and Rebecca are invited to attend." Another pause. Then, "Rebecca is in the middle of finals week." "Mom, this is a Presidential Medal of Freedom ceremony. Rebecca can miss 1 day of classes." "I'll call your father." "Charlotte, why didn't you tell us?" "Because I couldn't. And because you stopped expecting extraordinary things from me years ago." Now, standing in the White House East Room, I watched my family try to process their surroundings. The room was magnificent. Crystal chandeliers, portraits of past presidents, formal military honor guards stationed at precise intervals. But what dominated the space was the assembled gathering of senior government officials, military leaders and intelligence community executives who'd come to witness the ceremony. My father stood rigidly in his best suit, the one he wore to court for his most important cases. But his lawyer's composure was cracking as he observed the protocol and formalities surrounding us. This wasn't a corporate legal proceeding. This was the highest level of American government. My mother wore a navy blue dress and clutched a small purse with both hands, her eyes moving constantly between the formal decorations and the uniformed officials who nodded respectfully when they saw me. She'd spent 2 days trying to reconcile the daughter she thought she knew with the woman being honored by the president. Rebecca had arrived that morning, wearing her Harvard Law sweatshirt, apparently thinking a White House visit was casual enough for university attire. A Secret Service agent had quietly suggested she might want to purchase something more formal, and she'd spent an hour frantically shopping for appropriate clothes. "Charlotte," she whispered as we waited for the ceremony to begin. "This is insane. 2 days ago I thought you delivered packages or something." "I never delivered packages," I said quietly. That was just easier than explaining what I actually did. "Which was what, exactly?" Before I could answer, the White House announcer's voice filled the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States." The Air Force band began playing Hail to the Chief, and every person in the room stood at attention. My family rose with everyone else, but their faces showed the surreal shock of watching the President of the United States enter a room specifically to honor their daughter. President Williams walked with the measured pace of someone comfortable with absolute authority. He nodded to various officials as he made his way to the podium, but his eyes found mine across the room, and he offered a slight smile that acknowledged our previous communication during the Brookhaven operation. "Thank you all for being here today," the President began, his voice carrying the weight of office that commanded attention from anyone in hearing range. "We gather to recognize exceptional service to our nation, service that exemplifies the highest ideals of public duty and personal sacrifice." My father's face was pale. He'd spent his career representing important clients and arguing significant cases. But he'd never been in the presence of this level of governmental authority. The realization that his daughter operated in this world was overwhelming his ability to process. "The Presidential Medal of Freedom is our nation's highest civilian honor," the President continued. "It recognizes individuals whose contributions to American security, world peace, or cultural endeavors have been especially meritorious. Today's recipient has served our country with distinction in operations that have protected American lives and interests worldwide." Rebecca leaned toward my mother and whispered something I couldn't hear, but Mom shook her head and gestured for silence. The ceremony demanded their full attention. "Agent Charlotte Thompson," the President said, and hearing my real name in this context sent a chill through me. "Please step forward." The room was completely silent as I walked toward the podium. Every step felt weighted with the knowledge that my family was watching their understanding of me fundamentally change. The woman approaching the President wasn't the adequate daughter who'd been invisible at family celebrations. She was someone the leader of the free world considered worthy of the nation's highest honor. "Agent Thompson," the President said as I stood beside him, "your service to our nation has been extraordinary. Your coordination of the operation that protected Dr. Harrison and the critical research of Project Quantum Shield prevented a catastrophic intelligence breach that could have compromised American security for decades." Dr. Harrison was in the audience, along with his research team. When the President mentioned his name, Dr. Harrison stood briefly and nodded toward me, a gesture of gratitude that my family noticed. "But Agent Thompson's service extends far beyond a single operation," the President continued. "Over 7 years of classified service, she has coordinated protection for American assets on multiple continents, prevented numerous intelligence breaches, and demonstrated the kind of leadership that makes our nation safer." 7 years. My family was learning that for 7 years, while they'd assumed I was struggling to find my direction, I'd been serving at levels of government they'd never imagined. "Agent Thompson," the President said, turning to face me directly, "by the authority vested in me as President of the United States, I present you with the Presidential Medal of Freedom in recognition of your exceptional service to our nation." He placed the medal around my neck, a heavy, formal decoration that carried the weight of presidential recognition. The room erupted in applause, but I was watching my family's faces. My father's expression had moved beyond shock to something approaching awe. The lawyer who'd spent his career in federal courts was watching his daughter receive personal recognition from the President for service he'd never known existed. My mother was crying, not the controlled tears of pride she'd shown at Rebecca's graduation, but the overwhelming emotion of a parent discovering that her child had been serving at the highest levels of government while she'd worried about her career prospects. Rebecca sat motionless, staring at the medal around my neck and apparently trying to reconcile this moment with every assumption she'd made about her sister's life. "Agent Thompson," the President said as the applause concluded, "would you like to say a few words?" A few words, to the assembled officials, to the intelligence community leadership, to my family, who was learning the truth about my life in the most public possible way. "Thank you, Mr. President," I said, my voice carrying more clearly than I'd expected. "This recognition belongs not just to me, but to every person who serves our country in ways that can't be acknowledged publicly, to every operative who protects American interests in silence, every analyst who prevents threats before they materialize, every person who chooses service above recognition. I paused, looking directly at my family, and to families who support that service, even when they don't understand it. Sometimes protecting the people we love means letting them believe we're less than we are. But service to country and love of family aren't contradictory. They're the same commitment, expressed in different ways. The applause that followed felt different, warmer, more personal, but my attention was focused on my family's reaction. After the ceremony concluded, as officials and guests mingled in the formal reception, my family approached me with expressions that ranged from bewilderment to pride. "Charlotte," my father said, his voice unusually quiet, "I owe you an apology." "We all do." "You don't owe me anything, Dad." "Yes, we do. We assumed you were struggling, that you'd failed to live up to your potential. We were wrong about everything." Rebecca stepped closer, holding her phone with news articles she'd apparently been reading during the reception. "Charlotte, according to these reports, you've been involved in operations this says you coordinated protection for government assets in multiple countries." "Some of those reports are accurate," I said. "Why didn't you tell us?" my mother asked, her voice still shaky with emotion. "Because I couldn't. And because you'd already decided I was the daughter who couldn't handle the academy, who worked in an unremarkable job, who didn't achieve the things Rebecca achieved." "But you achieved more than any of us," Rebecca said quietly. "Charlotte, you just received the Presidential Medal of Freedom from the President. For saving the country from what exactly?" "Things you'll probably never hear about," I said. "Things that needed to be stopped before they became public knowledge." My father extended his hand, not for a handshake, but to examine the medal around my neck. "This is the highest civilian honor in America," he said with the precision of someone who understood governmental structure. "Charlotte, you've served at a level that most people never reach." "I served where I was needed," I said. "And we never knew," my mother said, more to herself than to me. "All those times we worried about your career. All those dinners where we talked about Rebecca's achievements while you just listened. You listened because you were protecting a cover story," Rebecca said, understanding dawning in her expression. "Every family dinner, every celebration where we didn't acknowledge you, you were letting us believe a lie to protect your real work." "I was protecting operational security. But yes, it meant letting you think I'd failed." The White House reception continued around us, but my family had created their own space for processing revelations that would reshape their understanding of the past 7 years. "Charlotte," my father said finally, "what happens now?" "Now I've been offered a promotion to Deputy Director of Strategic Operations. It requires Senate confirmation, which means my service will become part of the public record." "You're going to be confirmed by the Senate?" Rebecca asked. "For a position what exactly does a Deputy Director of Strategic Operations do?" "Coordinates intelligence operations that protect American interests worldwide," I said, "and reports directly to the Director of National Intelligence." The magnitude of the position settled over them gradually. Their adequate daughter was being promoted to one of the senior-most positions in American intelligence, with authority that extended to operations they'd never heard about. "We're proud of you," my mother said, her voice carrying an emotion I hadn't heard in years. "We should have been proud all along, but we didn't know what you were doing." "You couldn't know," I said, "but now you do." As we left the White House that evening, walking past the formal guards and through the security checkpoints that had seemed so impressive when we'd arrived, my family was quiet, not the uncomfortable silence of people who didn't know what to say, but the thoughtful quiet of people processing a fundamental shift in their understanding of reality. "Charlotte," Rebecca said as we reached the street, "I'm sorry we didn't save you a seat at my graduation." "It's okay. I was supposed to be in Frankfurt anyway." "For what?" "A conference that dealt with some of the same issues we handled at Brookhaven. I rearranged operational schedules to be there." "You rearranged government operations to attend my college graduation." "Family matters," I said, "even when the family doesn't know it matters." 6 months later, I sat in the front row of a Senate confirmation hearing, answering questions about my qualifications for Deputy Director of Strategic Operations. The hearing room was packed with reporters, congressional staff, and observers who wanted to witness the confirmation of someone whose service had been revealed through the Brookhaven operation. My family occupied seats in the gallery, watching as senators questioned me about operations I could discuss publicly for the first time in years. Rebecca had rearranged her class schedule to attend. My parents had taken time off from their practices to be present for the most important professional milestone of my career. When the committee voted to confirm my nomination, the applause that followed included voices I recognized, my family, cheering for achievements they finally understood. That evening, at the celebration dinner my parents hosted in one of Washington's finest restaurants, my father stood to offer a toast. To Charlotte, he said, raising his glass, who served our country with distinction while we worried about her career prospects. To the daughter who protected us while we failed to protect her from our own assumptions. To Agent Phoenix, Rebecca added, using the call sign that had appeared in news reports about the Brookhaven operation. The sister who let us believe she was ordinary while she was saving the world. To Charlotte, my mother said softly, who came home. But I wasn't the one who had come home. I'd never left. They were the ones who had finally arrived at understanding who I'd always been. In the end, that made all the difference. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.